Welcome back to another video of the Sports Speed Insider, and today what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at how and the process of applying learn, load and execute to maximum velocity exposures. We know the name of the game is to improve top speed for a lot of athletes, and inside the sports speed system we do prioritize top speed as a metric that serves as a really good indicator to capacity to withstand demands of sport, considering that it's the highest, most taxing general quality that we can develop with our athletes. So keeping that in mind, then what do we have to consider with regards to the development of maximum velocity? Well, first and foremost, this is where the system comes into its own. We have to identify speed age. So as soon as we can identify speed age, we can start to understand the relative taxonomy of sprinting at higher percentages as a constraint to which we want to start programming. So, it sounds like a lot, but it's not. We basically need to understand where on the curve of adaptation are they, and how suitable is maximum velocity sprinting for them before we even start to consider the technical demands. Because if we're just trying to run fast, that we're just going to lock up and technique's going to be corner flagged and almost blocked to create any form of real stimulus. So I want to take you through a couple of scenarios this week and look at how we can start to think about learn, load and execute for a given speed age. And predominantly most of your team sport athletes, they're going to be that learning to sprint. Like, I've never really met a team sport athlete, even the freakishly fast ones, that can't benefit from our initial reorientation shift, shifting away from 80% gym and 20% field to 80% field and 20% gym, because their bodies are just not prepared for it. So with that being said, I've got up our learn, our load and our execute, and we're going to just run through a couple of scenarios and a couple of tools and a couple of things that you could do in the next few minutes. So when you are considering, let's take a learn to sprint, let's take an athlete who is team sport athlete, maybe a senior level, and we are trying to develop top speed. So our first and foremost, this is where we will put in our long accels. Okay, the reason being, as we know, when we plot that long acceleration, we're trying to identify these zones to which we start to see the speed plateauing off. So that's why we gradually improve gradually expose to acceleration and higher speeds. So we can teach the athlete, the first thing they have to do is learn. They have to learn, and we know that we're focusing on prioritizing a step load. If you refer to the book, we're prioritizing a step load of contacts above or close to circa maximum, all right, of training max. Remember, that's 90% of peak, all right, is our max. So we're going to start to use that. Okay. You can get so far with applying the long acceleration principle, but again, it's only a learning tool, really. It's teaching the body how to operate. So when we start to consider, well, how do we load this? So the first thing that you do is you compound long accelerations, okay? And what that means is you increase the density of exposure. So from our initial sessions, and the learn, load, execute with regards to maximum velocity isn't as cyclic in nature, purely based on the demands. Like with acceleration, we can break down specific exercises and specialized strength and compound them, as we talked about. But with long acceleration, it becomes a bit more of a strategic approach over the course of sessions. So our first exposure would be to increase the step load at long acceleration. That's the way that we're going to load it, just to accumulate higher volumes of steps above. So we want to start at like 3 sets of 3 runs, which will give us about 12 contacts, 12 to 16 contacts, Okay, then we want to take that up to 20 contacts, 24 contacts, 30 contacts, above 80% of training max. And that's focusing on that zone. So that's one way of which you can load it. The next way of which you can load it, once you've got through the long acceleration, and you could do an intersession where you use, once they've accumulated to the long acceleration element, you can use them as build-ups. Okay, very simple build-ups at the end of your workout, your warm-up, sorry, to then identify the technique, okay, identify the technical constraint. Now what you'll find if you use the Sport Speed system, the first thing that you need to really focus on is frequency, it's turnover, because the way long accelerations work is they gradually build up, so they don't force fast turnovers, and we don't want to force fast leg speed with our athletes because they're just not built for it. Okay, so we gradually build it. So when we load, this is where we can use wickets or spacings, okay, as a very simple guide. Now, rule of thumb, never run over them, always run in front of them, okay, because so many times I'm not a big fan of encouraging, to step over the hurdle, because it really changes the way that you characterize gait, and it stops athletes from just running fast, and you just use them as guides. And actually what I have found is an athlete running side by side to a hurdle or a cone on the ground actually is enough of a cue, because seeing through the periphery, they're going to get those triggers and it's going to force them to turn over. I actually like to use the really small cones to run over as well, because there's just less risk and less stress. So first and foremost, what we want to do is control velocity. So we want to cap velocity at 80% of training max, which is 90% of max V, and we're determining maximum velocity of instantaneous GPS anyway, so it's very skewed. So it gives us a really nice training zone to accumulate reps. So we want to use frequency. So you're going to long excel for the first blocks, okay, because we have to slowly introduce learn, load, execute. Your long excel, your compound long excel, so you increase the amount of step load that you get. Then we want to start tapping in frequency to create further load, okay, which is going to speed up, because what we're trying to do is decrease the ground contact time and the amount of steps in a given distance that we would have been doing there. We're not changing speed here, we're changing the way of which we approach speed. And then the execution, as always, okay, we're looking to build towards flies. So 20 meter bleed-ins, so 20 meter run-ins with 10 to 15 meter work zone. And that's when show me here, that is when we go, show me what you can do. Give me the speed, show me if you can take that. And this is a really simple way for you to introduce, from a maximum velocity point of view, a programming consideration. I'm going to do my drills. We're going to be working from a technical model and reinforced by our actual running drills, so they could even come into your learn. But I wanted to give you today, we're going to talk about drills later in the program, but I wanted to give you a real good view of how you would apply learn, load and execute to just running fast or trying to run fast. So in a workout, you could, if you have an athlete who we've got learn to sprint, we've got an athlete that's training to sprint. So what that means is that we've used long acceleration and tapped out that the early acute response to speed training. Now we need to increase the magnitude of training effects. So I would do a couple of long accelerations at the end of the workout, the end of the warm-up, sorry. Then I would load it by using spacings, okay, to tap frequency or push stride length, okay, and we're going to touch on like the science of step length and stuff later on in the program. And then I'd be like, right, let's get the gates out, let's get you flying. And they're two real simple scenarios of which you can start to implement. And what I would say, the whole idea, think about this, right? The whole idea of using this is developing general speed. So from a long-term application effect, if you're only doing this in off-season or pre-season, it's really not going to tap or really exhaust itself as a stimulus because of the limited amount you're going to use. And that's key to understanding long-term training effects. So if you were to run that today, I would go out, put your boots on, try it yourself, get through that and see how you get on. And then next week, we're actually going to look at, again, establishing learn, load, execute principles with regards to change of direction and building non-linear sprinting. So hope you enjoy, and I'll see you next week.